Hello, hello, good evening. This is Mr. B with another episode of Free Talk with Mr. V. I am very excited to start a new series. Myself and you're seeing me here with Alicia, and we're planning to talk about adult communication because we think it's important enough, and it's important to talk about it from a lot of different perspectives. So we have came up with a lot of topics to talk about it. Alicia, how are you?
Hi, fine, and you?
Good. I am right now in Dubai, and it's such a treat to be able to call you. I think you're still in Manila.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately.
You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're right here on Free Talk. What would you want to tell the listeners about you? What would you want them to know?
Oh, I'm Alicia, and I'm very glad to discuss about a few topics with you. So I'm just happy.
Oh, very good. You're like me. I'm always smiling a lot. People think I never get angry, but I do. But I sometimes I wonder what my smile communicates. And knowing that we talk to each other all the time, and people around the world talk to each other, and couples talk to each other, we know these are a lot of forms of communication. And when I spoke to you, I was so glad that this amazing accent of yours, and I was like, wow, you'll be perfect to talk to our audience about forms of communication and ways we communicate between cultures, between genders, and in many different ways. And I wanted us to talk about that very subject on a regular basis. So I said it's adult communication, I call it. And I didn't even know it existed till I Googled it. And adult communication, I applied it in a lot of different places. I applied it in a lot of different ways. But here, let's see what we can do to talk about this form of communication.
Let's go.
For sure. When we spoke, one of the topics, and I usually lay out about 26 topics so we can cover quite a half of a year, like one a week, something like that. And the first one is called silent communication. And you said you want to go right into it. So I better get quiet. I better go silent.
Oh, so into the topic.
Yeah, sure. Why not? What do you think about that? Just from the one word alone, what do you think?
So silent communication sounds so fast as a topic, and I feel like 20 minutes might not be enough. But when you first told me about this topic, the first word that caught my attention was silent, and I was wondering, oh, what is silence? So basically, my definition of silence is the absence of sound, right? So we have our five senses, and one of them is the sound. So silence is the deprivation of sound. So to compensate this absence, then we might use our other senses.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we have a few examples in movies. For example, Daredevil, who lost their sight sense, and that uses the sound and other to be aware of his environment. So our senses is like a bridge to connect us with our environment and our surrounding. So meaning to say, going back to the topic, by being deprived of a sense, it will put the emphasis on the other. So silent communication is not because we remove the sound that we cannot communicate anymore. So there is many forms, there are many manners to communicate feelings, or even, I don't know, to communicate information outside
Yeah.
of using words or language. Um, for example, the sign language. So people still understand each other by using signs. How? Because they started to code and they started to put meaning. And once you know the code, once you apply it, you can understand the other person. So
And
communication, yeah.
no, I'm liking this because I mean, my brain went straight to relationships, right? And
Yeah.
we know how important communication is in relationships. And then all of a sudden, I mean, being married for so long, I'm thinking silent communication. I'm thinking about the silent treatment.
Yeah.
And and you're like, oh, this is an absence of sound and words. No kidding. And so the feeling was, oh my gosh, I'm getting the silent treatment. That means there's no sound, there's no words. And it's interesting because it makes me start thinking. I'm always thinking something is terribly wrong, but maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should say, so maybe something is terribly right. Maybe
Mm.
it's best to sit, think, and analyze when I'm not hearing any sound. I was just too quick to think something is wrong. So your points are clear. Maybe when there is no sound, maybe we need to sharpen our other senses.
Yes, because outside of using words, we can still express. So you talked about silent treatment, right? So does it mean that when we remove the words in the relationship, we don't communicate anymore? No, because I truly believe that we can still express our love to our partners by not using words. Basically, my opinion on that is as long as you show consideration to the person, then words are not necessary. But the issue with the silence treatment is you kind of remove this consideration because it may feel like, oh, you don't deserve my words, or
Right, right. And sometimes we go there because our mindset might go to maybe the worst part of the spectrum. But silent communication did not mean that it may not mean the silent treatment, because silent communications, I've
exactly.
seen where someone told me yes with their eyebrows going up and down.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it at first because I wasn't accustomed to the silent communication. So the person was very effective at saying yes. It says, do you want a cup of coffee? The person says yes. Yes, with absolutely no words. And I had to get accustomed to that person.
Mm.
So as I learned, it became very effective for me to stop and use, like you're saying, all of my other senses to observe the silent communication. So it wasn't the silent treatment. It was just saying an effective form of communication without words. So I can see both sides. I can see both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because in the communication is an exchange, right? So you can send an information, but the person do not receive it. And what you just said, I feel like it's the perfect example. So they sent you an information with their body language, with the nonverbal. But
Right.
because you don't know these codes, because you are not aware how to translate it, you did not receive, or you may not receive the message the person is trying to give you.
That is correct. That is correct. This is going to be exciting because that's a lot of what I want to talk about. And in our starting this podcast, I'm hoping that many families, couples, friends, whoever can become closer, to have better relationships, to express themselves more with or without words.
Yeah.
But we want to remind, because there's always young people coming up behind us or new people coming up behind us. And I mentioned earlier, culture is also what is said and what is not said. And so we can talk about all of those kind of things too, because these forms of communication, these verbal or nonverbal forms of communication are effective. So as we're talking today about silent communication, we saw the importance of someone who cannot speak altogether or cannot give verbal words or something, or maybe even if they could, they may not be in a position to do so. Or the third aspect, some of us, we look for these communication, the silent, nonverbal communication, even when someone is at a distance, because there may be let's say a traffic officer is telling us to halt or stop from a distance because there's some infraction somewhere. But all of these are silent, aren't they?
Yes,
And
I like your example because I was also thinking about this aspect of the silent communication, is it chosen? Is it forced? Is it me not wanting to listen to you? Or is it me not hearing you because of the environment? So all of this, as you said earlier, the silent communication can sound negative, but once we dig into it, we can realize that, oh, it's not as negative, and we just have to find ways to get around and still find a way to communicate.
And I didn't think of the word, you used the word code. And sometimes we are not thinking that we are a race of codes, and we just needed to decode what we're being shown. I mean, sometimes I think us, I'm speaking from the man perspective, us men perspective, my gender perspective, sometimes we react too fast. I must admit, right? And when we react too fast, we might say, hey, I'm talking to you, not realizing maybe that person couldn't speak back, like you said, or the situation was not there. Or you remember, when you watch some movies and let's say the lady was under duress, but you didn't know and she couldn't say anything, and you had to look for the nonverbal communication to know. Could you imagine being a 911 operator on the phone and trying to get, or a rescuer coming in, and all you had was binoculars, you can see, but you couldn't speak to the person? There's so many circumstances where we should really reconsider the behavior I mentioned about reacting too fast, and realizing, I think you just did it on this video too, for the listeners, her eyebrows went up and down. So I was observing, she was saying, yes, you're correct. And so those forms of nonverbal communication fit circumstances. And I think that's the code we need to understand, that we need to slow down, read the codes, and react, or uncode, then react, and so that we can have an effective form of communication, and realize that nonverbal communication, or what we are calling at this episode silent communication, is also and can also be very effective. Very much so. Wow, wow, wow. I mean, Alicia, this is how the podcasts go. And this is also part of it. And we're telling our listeners to look at things from many different perspectives. In these cases, we know it's very important for us adults to communicate each other. And across you and I, we both have dark skin, but we are very different cultures. And we also need to listen to each other, whichever way or form, because in my case with yours, we're in different generations completely, right? And different countries. I think you're French. I didn't tell your listeners earlier, and you have a wonderful accent, French. And from these perspectives, you may have seen more, heard more, and maybe even communicated more along different lines. Me, Mr. B, having been an instructor, one of the forms of communication, we're going to bring up quite a few of them, and things pertaining to ways of communicating. And we just have these one-line subjects about communication. And then we will see if we can dive into it. So far, how do you feel about it?
Oh, I'm really excited because communication is so complex. Human beings are complex, and having to handle other human being is very hard, but it's all about codes and how we use them. Because it's interesting that we can understand the codes and use them to manipulate someone, or just to do good with our knowledge. So let's use our knowledge to spread good information that could empower, as you said, families, young people, or people who are just interested into this topic.
It's very nice, very nice. So we will continue this series for sure, adult communication. This is Mr. B. I am Mr. B. This is Free Talk with Mr. B. The series is being sponsored by a Filipino company called iFranchise, and I go to Philippines at times and work with iFranchise to keep expanding their businesses for people who want to start a business. All through my life, I've been into communicating and communications, and I'm still learning. And I think from you, from this podcast, from our conversation, we will continue to learn, because we're going to bring up these normal everyday points and talk to normal everyday people. There are times also, I think you even mentioned that some you would like to bring on the show also, and there's room for that, one or two people more. For times that we want to continue into discussion. We're not thinking about bringing on clinical psychologists to discuss ways of communicating. Because I mean, if you just talk to your neighbor and it was effective, and especially if you did good, if you gave back that line of communication, then we will have adult communication. And by the title, we're not trying to exclude non-adults in this, right? It just sometimes the words are either precise or concise. The nonverbal comes in many ways and forms, and we'll go over those over the weeks. And sometimes I think words get in the way even. There's a song that says that. And as adults, we need to bring something to the table. And as you just mentioned, we need to give back good as much as we can and share whatever knowledge we get. So I'm very excited to continue this series with you and to continue talking on Free Talk with Mr. B, Adult Communication with Mr. B and Alicia, with Alicia and Mr. B.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you so very much.